أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. My beloved brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you all doing? Alhamdulillah, it's Friday. Alhamdulillah. And we ask Allah to accept us our fasting. Another basically 2 weeks. We're almost there at the halfway mark of Ramadan, night number 12. Shoo, it's gone very quickly. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us in what remains. Ameen. We have another jam-packed evening tonight. A lot of information, but I hope inshallah we can keep track of all the different strands and threads. So we are still in the 11th century. 11th century, the 1090s, basically 1,000 years ago. And it was in this century when we started off the century with 3 Khalifas. The beginning of the millennium we had 3 Khalifas. At the end of the millennium we basically had no Khalifa. The Khalifa we had was the Khalifa of Qurtuba, and we spoke about the fall of the Caliphate of Qurtuba after a civil war, and eventually by the end of the century, Toledo had fallen and the Muslims were holding on for dear life, thanks in part by the Al-Murabitun, the Al-Murabids. We also had, and we'll talk more about them now, a caliphate in the middle of northern Africa, based in Egypt, and this is called the Fatimid Caliphate. The Fatimids were a Shia Ismaili dynasty. Now I must take a bit of a side story here. We know that Islam, there is a schism between Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah and the Shia. The Shia are a minority, a sizable minority, about 10-15% of the Ummah are Shia. Within Shiism, there was also a split between what we have Ismaili Shias, this was the majority, this was the dominant Shias, and the 12 Shias which we see today, the 12 Shias were a minority. So for much of Islam, the dominant strand of Shiism was called Ismaili Shiism, and they had a very unique set of ideas. One of the things that all Shias believe in this concept of an Imam, the belief that there is an infallible guide that Allah has sent after the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who would interpret the Quran and bring us out of darkness to light. That the concept of all Shias believe in the concept of an Imam. Now the Ismailis believe in a living Imam. In fact, the Ismailis still exist today, and they are known as the Aga Khans. So the Imam is still alive today. They have a living Imam, and he alone interprets the Quran, and they follow him. And they also have a very unique way, because one might say, but why do we need an Imam when if I open the Quran I can read it for myself? They said, no, you only read the external of the Quran. Every ayah has a hidden internal meaning which only the Imam understands. This is why it's called the Batiniyya. One of their names is the Batiniyya. The Batin means the hidden. So the Imam knows these hidden secrets of the Quran, and every time a new Imam comes, he reveals more of the hidden secrets. So this is the Ismaili Shia sect, and they were very powerful at the beginning of, as I said, the 10th century. They had a caliphate. They called themselves the Khalifa of the Fatimid dynasty, and they actually established Al-Azhar University. The Fatimid dynasty established Al-Azhar University. And of course then we had the official Khalifa of Baghdad, the Sunni Khalifa in Baghdad, the Abbasid Khalifa, who was basically powerless. He was a figurehead, and his authority barely even extended outside of Baghdad. And at this point in time, subhanallah, Shiism was so prominent and strong that the Khalifa of Baghdad was controlled by a 12 Shia family called the Buwayyids, a dynasty. A Shia family controlled behind the scenes. The Umayyad Khalifa the Abbasid Khalifa was basically a prisoner within the palace. So this is the state of affairs within the Ummah politically. Ideologically, we said that the strongest threat to Orthodox Islam was the emergence of the Batiniyya, this Shia group, and because they're speaking about hidden meanings and hidden secrets, and people are always looking for mystical answers, this became something of a huge uprising within the Ummah. And we had very strange groups. For example, we had a group called, also another Ismaili group called the Karamita. Karamita, these are Muslims, Shia, who attacked Mecca. They lived in Bahrain. They attacked Mecca on Hajj, killed 30,000 Hujjaj, stole the black stone, the Hajr al-Aswad. For over 20 years it was in Bahrain. And they said, Aina tayran ababil, to prove the point that what you read in the Quran, you people are backwards. They said, where is the Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil? We basically destroyed the Kaaba. Where is the tayran ababil? Where are these birds that's going to destroy us, like you people read? And so they took the black stone to Bahrain, and it took a long negotiations for eventually this group to give back the black stone. Also within this, there is also a secretive. So within the Ismaili, there was a very secret sect called the Nizaris, and this is where the term of Hashashin, the assassins, they were a offshoot group of Ismailis, and they had set up a secret headquarters where they would preach undercover, and if any group sort of infringed on them, they would assassinate you. The word assassin comes from them. They were called the Hashashin, assassins. So all of this is happening during this period, and therefore Orthodox Islam, which was established by Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, we spoke about that in Baghdad, which was Hanbali, literal understanding of Aqidah called Athari. This was on the verge of being extinct. This was really going out of fashion. It couldn't deal with all these new ideologies. The philosophers are making a comeback. The Mu'tazila are basically on the rise again, and so things are really falling, going wrong. And that's why we see Toledo falls, Sicily falls. Really, there is a need for a revival in the Ummah. Now, like the Al-Murabitun, a group that would help bring strength to the Ummah would come from a very unexpected place. The Turkish tribes, when we think of Turkey, we think of Istanbul. That's not really where they originate from. The Turkic tribes were from deep Central Asia, and they were nomadic people. They embraced Islam. They were still a warlike, Bedouin type of people. They didn't have major cities, but they embraced Islam, and as they emerged into the Islamic world, they proved to be very proficient warriors, and they were very devout Sunni Muslims. And so the Khalifa of Baghdad called to them for help. The Khalifa is besieged by this Shia family. He's calling to the Turkish, this Turkic Seljuk, they call the Seljuks, save me, help me. And they answer his call, they ride into Baghdad, and they basically take over Baghdad. So now we have a, inverted commas, illiterate, warlike, warrior people, pious people, but not very schooled in theology, not very deep in knowledge. They take over the most advanced civilization on earth. A place with the most universities, the most schools, the most libraries, they take over the realm. What do we do now? And this is where a man, and this man, we should know his name. He is, if anybody has the title, even more than Al-Ghazali, that revived Islam at this very low point. It wasn't a great scholar. He wasn't a great mujahid. He wasn't a khalifa. He was a bureaucrat. He was an administrator, a paper pusher, but he would change the administration of the Ummah. He's called Nizam al-Mulk. Nizam, actually it's Nizam, but it's actually Nizam. Nizam means to order the Mulk, the dominion, the whole country. He was the Grand Vizier of the Seljuks. So the Seljuks are a warlike people. When they take over the bureaucracy, they say, we don't know how to run a government. Who can we find to help? So they found this man who was a pious man. He started off wanted to learn to be an alim, but then he left that and he became a tax collector in the revenue services. He worked for the SARS, and eventually he rose up as being a very honest and proficient administrator. So they chose him to be the Grand Vizier, and he's basically got free reign to run the whole bureaucracy of the Ummah, while the Sultan is going out fighting wars and whatever sultans do. The Khalifa is so we have a Khalifa who's a figurehead. He's just there to wave. You have the Sultan who's really, the military ruler. He doesn't want to know about numbers and figures. He doesn't have time for these things. And then you have Nizam al-Mulk, who is actually running the administration, and he will basically change a lot of the Ummah. As they say, that in the history of Islam, he's perhaps the most important administrator in our entire history. Up until the fall of the Caliphate, many of his administrative policies remained. Till today, you'd find many institutions of learning called the Nizamiyya after him, because he would start this thing of universal universities. And he has a book on governance. Now, a little bit about him. So he was a Persian man. He grew up from a humble beginning, but a pious family. His father was also, he grew up in a family that loved the ulama, started off going to the madrasas, but eventually he didn't go all the way. He followed a corporate career, as we could say. And there's a lesson in here, that the Ummah does not only need Maulanas and ulama. The Ummah doesn't only need mujahideen and khalifas. It also needs engineers and lawyers and doctors. And so long as they have a love for the deen, and they have a desire to build Islam, there is a place for everyone. In fact, we have too many, maybe even too many Maulanas. We need more of our, as we could say, secular people coming into the sphere of Islam, learning the basics of the deen, and then pushing the deen forward. Here we see a man doing this. And he's viewed by, as we said, by many historians as the greatest statesman within Islamic history, or vizier in Islamic history, and his policies survived until the 20th century. The ulama, the historians write about him that he was a man who was full of goodness and piety. He was inclined to righteousness. He submitted to anyone who criticized him. He listened to them, and he acknowledged his faults, and he would weep openly if he made a mistake. Subhanallah, this is what his routine. Before he comes to office, he makes sure he has wudu. Before he logs onto his computer and he's going to work on his Excel, whatever, he is in the state of wudu. I'm doing ibadah. He saw his job as an act of worship, and he would fast regularly, and he loved being in the company of the ulama. So he's not an alim, but he loves the ulama. And so when he, so he wrote this book, the Book of Governance, because the Sultan was a young man. He's a much older man. So he's trying to give this young, wild, Turkish Sultan who's running around with his sword, trying to teach him the way of ruling a country. And his Book of Governance, 1,000 years before we had the King Code and all the rules of how to govern correctly, we have this man writing the rules of how a government should be run. And one of the hadiths he brings there, he tells his Sultan that there's a hadith where the Prophet says, everyone who has given leadership will be tied up on the day of Qiyamah. Allah is going to tie you up. That leadership, that control that you had would be a noose around your neck. And if you dealt justly, Allah would untie that noose and then you go to Jannah. But if you were unjust, it will be a means by which it constricts you and will take you to Jahannam. So he really sees his job as an amana, not as a privilege. He is a servant of the ummah, and he's desperately looking to revive the ummah. And one of the things that he believed was paramount in bringing the ummah back on track was to re-establish Islamic learning. And that's why he began what is now the prototype of the university structure. Yes, we had Al-Azhar University, we had Kirawan University, but these were one major institutions. What he wanted to do was like a franchise of universities across the ummah, and they have one syllabus. And also we want the best students to come here, because he himself comes from a poor background. Very good students, you must live, and you must live at you must have a residence, and if you are a good student, we will pay you to stay there. This was new, we didn't have this in the world. And so he establishes these nizamiyas. He also has another agenda, in that he wants to openly counter Ismaili Batinism and the growing philosophers who are encroaching on Islamic theology. He wants to re-establish Orthodox Islam. And so he builds the greatest nizamiya. The biggest one is of course in Baghdad. This is the capital. So he builds the biggest, at that time, the biggest institute of learning in Baghdad. He establishes it. And as we said, Baghdad is a cesspool of heresy, of ideas, well, good or bad, but really Islamic orthodoxy is falling far behind. People are moving towards all these modern ideas. Now, subhanAllah, don't we know of a time like that, where new ideas and ideologies are the norm, or exciting, people want to levitate to that, but you have a class on hadith, on salah, on wudu, that's empty. No one wants to go to, that's old, that's antiquated, that must be reformed and come with times. So how does he make Islam, Orthodox Islam, relevant for his day and age? So he builds this nizamiyah. I remember I said at the end of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal that a group of scholars came with philosophy, and they said, Sheikh, I know you hate philosophy causes so much problems, but there is a route where philosophy can be used for good and we can get to the same conclusion. This is the beginning of the Ash'ari Aqidah. And Imam Ahmad said, no, I don't like this, and he banished them. And this tiny group were pushed out of Baghdad, and they settled in a city called Naishapur. And this is where Nizam al-Mulk grew up. So he grows up learning from a very branch group of Sunni Islam that is not as literal, but tries to get to the same conclusion, and it uses theology, it uses a bit of kalam to get to the same conclusion. So Nizam al-Mulk comes from the school, and he finds that this is a bit better at countering the modern theologies. And so in his Nizamiyya, he wanted someone that he's a Shafi'i himself, Nizam al-Mulk, and that's why the Shafi'i madhab kind of gets into a dominant position. He wants a school that propagates the four madhahib, but in particular the Shafi'i madhab, and finds a way to bring rational thought and kalam to establish Orthodox Islam. The first Nizamiyya he chooses a very well-renowned scholar, and this scholar, to the best of his ability, minutes he tries to teach Orthodox Islam, but he basically gets thrown out. The people of Baghdad want nothing to do with him. There are riots, they are fighting. On the one side, the modernists, as we'd call, are rebelling, and on the other side, the Orthodox, the conservatives are rebelling against him. The literalists are rebelling against him. And Nizam al-Mulk, he writes a letter, he said, I established this university to revive Islam, not to cause riots in Baghdad. Just imagine, Maulanas of this madrasa is killing Maulanas of that madrasa, subhanallah. He said, what's going on? So he realized he needed a very special kind of scholar. A scholar who would be so good, so prolific, that he could challenge all these different sects, whether it was the Batiniya, whether it was the philosophers, whether it was the Shia, whether it was Christians, able to debate in a way that would really dominate the conversation, but he also had a charisma that people want to follow. And he asked around, is there any scholar that we could put as the dean, as the chancellor of the Nizamiya of Baghdad? And the ulama said, there is an up-and-coming rising star in Persia. His name is Abu Hamid Muhammad al-Ghazali. He seems to be a superstar on the rise. And Nizam al-Mulk calls him, they have a brief interview, and he likes what he sees, and he said, and this man is just starting out. But I mean, at 30 he's already authored a few books. An unknown scholar, but in the field, in the academic circles, he's making waves. Nizam al-Mulk likes him, and he says, you will be the dean of the Nizamiya of Baghdad. And from there, if you're able to establish and defeat basically all these groups and sects, then we're going to take your curriculum, we'll photocopy it, and we'll put it in every nizam in the entire world. And your curriculum will become the standard. This is the project, the idea, that your teaching and your books would become the doctrine of Islam. Now, subhanAllah, if you were to ask, what is Orthodox Sunni Islam? It is Shafi'i, Ash'ari, with Athari as well. The Athari creed still remains, and a bit of Tasawwuf as well. This is basically, it's the Ghazalian creed. Imam Ghazali would establish this. So we'll get to Imam Ghazali tomorrow, inshallah. So now he just gets this prime job. How is he going to do this? But back to Nizam al-Mulk. Nizam al-Mulk, of course, he's got a grand project for the Ummah. And of course, when you do this, you're going to have many enemies. And perhaps the enemies that were most serious to worry about are these hidden assassins. No matter where you look, there could be an assassin. And these, and that's an interesting story about them as well. They are called, these were assassins to the death. They would come, they would kill their target, and then they would commit suicide. This is this like deep kind of fanaticism, following their ruler or their imam to the T. And it is this group of the assassins who would, for about 200 years, would be like the boogeyman in the closet. Every Amir, every Sultan, every scholar, even every Crusader general would be worried. You would never know when an assassin would come to you. As a warning, they would leave. You'd have the most protected ruler in the world. He would come to his room and you'd find a dagger on his pillow. That's warning number one. They would get in when no one knows. How do these people get in? And so but their first victim, the first man that they killed, a high-profile man, was Nizam al-Mulk. Nizam al-Mulk was in Ramadan on his way from Nizamiya, fasting on his way for Hajj, and a man comes looking like a Sufi Sheikh, and Nizam al-Mulk wanting to meet this man. It's an assassin, and they stab Nizam al-Mulk. 1092, the man who was basically in charge of the Ummah dies. 3 months later, the Sultan, the Turkish Sultan, also assassinated by the Ashashin, the assassins. The historians say Nizam al-Mulk was the first of a long series of such attacks by the assassins, which in a calculated war of terror brought sudden death to sovereign rulers, to princes, generals, governors, and even divines who had condemned Ismaili doctrine and authorized the suppression of those who professed them. Within, as we said, Nizam al-Mulk is killed. 3 months later, the assassins killed the Seljuk Sultan. And this throws the Ummah into absolute chaos once again. Now, as we said, Nizam al-Mulk is killed 1092. 1095, 3 years later, Europe now sees a prime opportunity to do something which they couldn't imagine, that the Muslims are on their knees. We just beat them in Spain. We just beat them in Sicily. They have no ruler. Let us make a grand march to conquer Jerusalem. And the first crusade is called the Pope Urban II. He calls a meeting at Clermont, not Clermont here, Clermont in France, where all the nobles and the kings, and he says, basically, he gives a rousing speech about how long are you going to allow the land of Christ to be in the hands of the infidels? How long are you going to allow our sacred relics to be desecrated by these people? Now is the time. Now is the time for Christianity to unite. And all of you, if you sign up to this jihad, crusade is basically a Christian jihad, your sins will be forgiven. And there are many people that had a lot of sins to pay for, and his call resonates with Europe. It goes throughout every country. It unites Christianity under one banner. And this begins the first crusade. 100,000 people leave European lands, all on their way to the Middle East to capture Jerusalem. And so we'll talk about the fall of Jerusalem and Imam Ghazali tomorrow, bi'idhnillah, insha'Allah. Was a lot, eh? Alhamdulillah. Right, okay, so tonight's question, or yesterday's question, which city is the most populous and prosperous city in Sicily during the Islamic rule? This is the capital of Sicily, Palermo. Right, Palermo, that's the name of the city. Nice. Sumaya Asmal. Ismail Asmal. Sumaya Asmal. And Ayad Daniels. MashaAllah. MashaAllah. Shukran. Tonight's question, what was the name of the Pope who called on Christians to march onto Jerusalem? He called the first crusade. Pope, which Pope was it? Inshallah, you know who that is. And then just a reminder, please, for those who are those who can, to support our Mahrajan program, as little as 100 rand, and you can support in feeding people. Or if you so wish, you can buy a whole pot for 4,000 rand. Bismillah. May Allah bless you. Ameen. Wa sallallahu Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi sahbihi Islam mursaleen. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.